Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, I Think I Can, Using Student Self-Efficacy to Build Motivation. Today's webinar is presented by Dr. Diana Martin, Professor at Kaiser University Graduate School of Education.
Thank you, Eileen. I'm so excited to be here today. This is one of my favorite topics, and I'm going to see, looks like I have a chat. Okay, there's the link. All right. I'm looking at the chat button, so as I talk, if you have questions or comments, I would be thrilled to answer them so I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. Today's topic is one that I like because it helps us help students. And I'm going to begin with 3 metaphors just to get us involved in this, and then I'll go ahead into the project. The first is about the dessert tray. The second one is called road test. And the third one is about the voice in your head. So for the dessert tray, picture yourself that you've gone to this marvelous meal. You've gone to a great restaurant and had multi-courses, the best food you've had maybe in your life, at least in a long time. And the waiter comes up to you and says, would you like to see the dessert menu? And you say, no, no, thanks. It was a great meal. I think I'm done, just finished with the meal. And the waiter, who is an uncanny psychologist, instead brings you this tray. And on the tray are all these beautiful, magnificent desserts. My favorite is chocolate, but you can, since we're just imagining, you pick whatever you want. And as you're looking at the tray, you think, you know what? Maybe I could just handle one more course to this dinner. Maybe I could stand to have that chocolate mousse. What you have done is very simply, you have changed your mind. You changed your mind. We use that in common language, but it's also applicable to what we're talking about today. When you changed your mind, you changed your behavior. In this case, you got the chocolate mousse or the strawberry shortcake or whatever it is you wanted. So part of what we talk about with efficacy is changing your mind. Now let's go to the next one, the road test. You probably remember when you were learning to drive that you were always told to keep your eyes on the road. Keep your eyes on the road, especially, now I'm from Florida, so we had to worry about sometimes a cow or something walking across the road. Other parts of the country worried about moose. But part of the reason was you had to keep your eyes on the road so you could see where you were going. Another thing, another reason you have to keep on your eyes on the road is, you may know this. Have you ever noticed that if there's an accident on the side of the road, the people in the accident are in more danger than they would be, even if they're pulled pretty far off the road itself? They're in danger because they're on the side of the road. And the reason, there is a psychological reason, is we tend to drive in the direction we're looking. When we see something on the side of the road and we look at it, if we're not careful, we'll steer right into it. It's unconscious, but we do it. This means our behavior changes by what we see. We drive in the direction we're looking. So in the first case, the dessert tray, you can change your mind and that changes your behavior. In the road test example, your perception can change your behavior, good or bad. Last choice, voice in your head. You probably know what I mean about the voice in your head. We all have them. It might be, I'm bad at math, or maybe I'm mad at math. I'm bad at math, or I can't do this, or I can do this. But the voice in our head is a script. And some psychologists say that script develops very, very early in life. And it's hard to pull away from that script. So what we're trying to do today when we talk about efficacy is to change the script, change it into a cheerleader instead of a black cloud. There is a well-known psychologist, William James, who is known as the person that started psychology in the United States. That's not the way they say it. That's my description of it. They say it much more formally when they talk about him in the literature. But he wrote, human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their mind, changing the inner attitudes of their mind, can change the outer aspects of their life. They can change what you think, and what your students think can change the way you act. Now, I love stories. And when I was thinking about putting this PowerPoint together, I thought about a story I used to read to my daughter when she was little, The Little Engine That Could. And the slogan, as you probably know, I think I can. And to refresh your memory, in case you didn't grow up with this story, or it's been a while since you have, it's about a little train, a train that's carrying toys and treats for good girls and good boys. And the train breaks down. It's not the train in this picture. This is the rescue train. So 3 different trains come along to help. And for different reasons, each one of the first 3 trains cannot or will not help. Lastly, along comes the little blue engine. And the blue engine is successful when bigger engines and smarter engines and older engines could not be, because he thought he could. When we teach this to children, we often use questions like, have you ever tried to do something that was difficult? Does believing in yourself make it easier? That's the topic that we're covering today in today's seminar, is how self-beliefs can help you who are working with students and can also help the students whom you are working with. Every time I start this topic, this pops up, so I felt obligated to show it. It's by a quote by Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Here's what a psychologist named Brenner says, psychiatrist, sorry. And I'm going to read it because it's the results of her study. Your beliefs create and dictate what your attitudes are. Your attitudes create and dictate how you respond. In other words, they dictate your feelings. And your feelings dictate how you behave. Your feelings dictate how you behave. Now that's a lot of ideas coming at you. So here's the 5 things that I'm going to try to do today. When you finish, hopefully, you will know more about self-efficacy. You will know how self-efficacy, I'm going to have to say that 20 times to get this through this program. You will know how self-efficacy affects motivation, and you will know what affects self-efficacy. You'll identify, or you should be at least more familiar with, ways to help students grow their self-efficacy. And you will understand, hopefully, or you'll have some tips about how you can have more self-efficacy yourself and model this for those individuals you are trying to help. Let's see, let me stop and see if do I have any comments or questions so far? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. You will make me feel less lonely if you drop in at some point and ask a question. All right, this is the formal chart. There was a man named Albert Bandura, and you've probably heard of him. He's the one, if you've ever done in school any kind of research about whether watching violence on TV makes children more violent, he's the one that did the first study where children watched grown-ups hitting kind of a blow-up doll, the Bobo doll. And after they watched that, they started hitting it too. That's called observational learning. They learned by watching someone else. But he was a cognitive psychologist. He looked at the way we think and how that affects behavior. And on the left are the 4 things that his theory, social behavioral theory, says affect behavior change. Cause, not affect with an A, effect with an E. They make behavior change. And these are the 4 things: observational learning, watching somebody else; self-efficacy, what we're talking about today, what you believe about your ability to do something, that's the self-efficacy; goals, what does the person that is exhibiting the behavior, what do they want? And outcome expectancies. Outcome expectancies is interesting. It means how much does the person, student, learner, teacher believe? To what degree do they believe that they can change their behavior? Then to keep the changes, which is going to be your goals if you're working with students, there are two main factors: internal reinforcement, which is where self-efficacy comes in, and external reinforcement. And that is how teachers and significant others in students' lives can impact. Now I'm going to show this real quickly because I don't want to get too many words on the screen. This is one model. It's called the music model because it's M-U-S-I-C, music. And it has to do with the factors that can have an effect on efficacy in a student or in a teacher. So the first one is, does the person have control over the environment? Does the person believe they can make a difference? You've all experienced this. If you've ever, I don't know, wanted to go on a diet or become healthier or learn a new language, you went through this music inventory to discern whether you thought it was a good goal. So first of all, could you do it? Is it under your control? Second of all, is it something that would make a difference to your life? Is it useful? Thirdly, and that gets back to the previous slide where we talked about what they believe if they could do it, is can you succeed? If you take on a goal that you cannot succeed, you will not have efficacy. I used to live in Texas. I lived in Texas for 10 years. And I might like the Dallas Cowboys. And it does not mean that no matter how hard I try and how much I want it, I will never be an NFL football player, because it's not reasonable that I would succeed at that desire. So there are limitations. And one of the things, especially mentally healthy people think about is what is the possibility of success. In the story of the train, the efficacy was a good thing, but it had to be a reasonable goal, or then it's not healthy. And one of the problems we have sometimes with SWD clients is they may have an inflated idea of their possibility of success, which we will talk about during this program. The fourth thing is interest. Do I even care? And the last thing is caring by the environment. Does somebody care? Somebody else care that I can do it? So if we talk about motivation, there are some wheels that must be going together for it to work. If students believe they can succeed, then they will try, and effort is this is where motivation comes from. So if you have the green one, if you are able to improve your own self-efficacy or that of your students, increase your beliefs that it is possible, that you are capable, that this increases motivation, which increases choice and effort and how long you stick to it. That's one of the lessons of the little train that could. He kept trying. And that contributes to success, which guess what? That success increases self-efficacy. And the motor starts running, the wheels spin round. So let's start out with a quiz for you, all of our participants. This is a self-efficacy. Okay, all right. This is a self-efficacy scale, and you've used these scales before. So on a scale of 1 to 5, don't have to write this down. Don't have to take notes. It's not a real test. Just do it in your head. On a scale of 1 to 5, if I asked you, how confident are you that if asked, you could run 100 yards? 1, not confident. 5, very confident. How confident are you if I asked you, could you run a 5K race? And I work with a man who's a marathon runner. He happens to be chair of our department at Kaiser, which is ridiculous that he has enough time to do that, but that's another story. So how confident are you if I asked you to that you could run a marathon? Now, when you're considering these goals, you're thinking about your own self-efficacy. You are measuring and considering your ability to do these things based on all kinds of information that we don't have to go into because you know what you're doing. You're looking at these goals. Now, the last one, a marathon, that's pretty powerful stuff. You might be a pretty good athlete to be able to do that. And so somebody in our listening group might be a 5 on a marathon. But I'm very perverse and I decided to push it to the next level. So I Googled, I used that outstanding research tool called Google. No, it's not. And I said, what's the hardest marathon? So guess what? Anybody that put a 5 for the last one, consider this. There is a marathon that requires individuals to participate in 7 marathons in 7 continents in 7 days. And there's the name of it if you want to look it up. Now, most of us would not be have a high degree of self-efficacy on that. So when you're considering these goals, this is what our students look at when they look at some of the challenges in the classroom. They're thinking about whether they could do it. They're thinking, when they think about whether they could do it, they're drawing up some things about what they know about themselves. They are defining for themselves self-efficacy. Here's the formal definition. The references listed here are included in this PowerPoint on the last slide. So self-efficacy is defined as perceived capabilities for learning or performing actions at designated levels. Now, there are 2 things there I want to underscore. Perceived capability is not the same thing as real capability. So students can overestimate or underestimate their capabilities. Designated levels means that self-efficacy is relative to the task. So your self-efficacy to, I don't know, let's go backwards, walk 5 feet is probably different than if I designate the level to be 7 marathons in 7 continents in 7 days. So part of it is about what you think, and part of it is about the level of challenge for that particular task. How do people figure out what their self-efficacy is? And whether they know it's called self-efficacy, all learners use self-efficacy to determine how things that affect, which we'll talk about later, things that affect motivation. I will give details on each of these. Self-efficacy, the most important determinant of self-efficacy is your past or current performance. If you've been good at something, your self-efficacy is high. If you failed at it, your self-efficacy in that kind of task is low, based on what you know about what you've done. And your students are doing the same thing. Vicarious experiences means that efficacy can also be gauged according to watching what people, the student, the learner knows how well they fare on performing the task. Social persuasion can be positive and negative, and it can be as simple as, you can do this, from a friend, or nobody ever gets through that test alive, from a friend. Also important are some physiological indexes. So if you don't feel that way well that day, that would affect your self-efficacy. All right, let's look at each one of these. Past or actual performance. Past or actual performances are the number one factor, is the number one factor in determining how well you think you can do on something you haven't tried yet. And this affects your students as well. What we'll see later is one way teachers can help students is to remind them of past or current actual successes. It sounds oversimplistic, but it works. Okay, you've done this before. You can do it. I've heard coaches say this to youngsters at bat when they strike at a ball. Okay, now you know what to do. You've done this before. Just gets them back on track. So the first determinant is experience. The second determinant is vicarious experiences. These are ways we and our students figure out how they feel about whether they can achieve or not, and those affect motivation. Now, here you see children watching other children. I want to make sure that there is something called observational learning, learning by watching, but vicarious experience takes it one step closer. Vicarious experience is learning or watching by someone who is like you, or sometimes it can be by someone in your circle that you like. They're not exactly like you, but it's apparent and you love them. So if they can do it, you can do it. But mostly vicarious experiences work the best when a student or teacher sees someone like them succeeding in the task that is challenging to them, or a teacher sees another teacher succeeding in a task, and that teacher is facing challenges like the first teacher. So we have experience, we have vicarious experience, social persuasion. Social persuasion affects the way we gauge whether we can do something and the way our students gauge whether they can do something. It can be positive, and as you well know, it can be negative. But positive support can be very helpful in efficacy. And it can be almost like cheerleading. You know you can do it. We got you. You can do it. Or it can be almost like a reward system, like in athletics. If someone achieves well on an athletic team, they get a lot of social reinforcement, and that motivates them more than the achievement itself many times to continue. What other things can affect physiological effects on self-efficacy? Can be how you physiologically are impacted at that particular moment. Are you anxious? For example, on standardized tests, anxiety sometimes becomes an issue. Are you stressed? Do you not feel well, or does the student not feel well? So on any one day, the efficacy can be different because of physiological. So what we've talked about, self-efficacy, according to the research that is cited here, and also I'm going to talk more about it as we continue. Self-efficacy has an impact on motivation, learning, self-regulation, meaning how you go about achieving your goals, and achievement. Isn't that interesting? You actually can affect whether you achieve something by your belief system. It can't be out of proportion to your abilities, but you can, and your students can, achieve at higher levels if they improve their self-efficacy. And if their goals, if they keep their eyes on the road and aren't driving off on the side of the road looking at the accidents. Now, here's some caveats, some warnings. Just because someone has a high level of self-efficacy, that doesn't take the place of lack of ability. As I explained earlier, I will never be an NFL professional football player. I could have a mental state that causes me to believe I am, but it doesn't matter. It wouldn't make me be a great kicker or tackler or any of those things. Also, I wonder if anyone has seen, there's a television show, actually it's the older version of the show, American Idol. Anybody seen that? Let's see if anybody says. No one has seen American Idol. Well, I'll just keep talking to myself. Okay, so American Idol used to be a television program where they let people who are not professionals come to a site and they try out for the show. And the show is a singing show. And you've got to have this great voice that is so good that despite the fact that you've had no training, you could become a, as they call it on the show, or used to, a pop star. Well, at the beginning, when American Idol first started, it's now more professional for what I've been told, they would let almost anybody wander in and try out. And part of the entertainment factor was that the people, some of the people trying out had a high level of self-efficacy. That means they were sure they were great singers, but they had no ability. We would cringe when you would hear them sing, because although they had the efficacy, they could not sing. They did not have the ability. And no matter how much they believed they were pop stars, and they did not have to have mental problems, it was more an ego problem or faulty hearing for all I know, it did not make up for the lack of ability. So the second thing is, if you have a little bit of efficacy, if it's not way out of bounds like the American Idols that were singing off key, just a little bit better, that's good, because it makes the student, makes you stretch and you can grow into the task. But if it's too high, as I said in the beginning, that can be a problem, because then the student or person fails. And if they fail, that depletes their self-efficacy. Now, when it comes to motivation, it's important that I tell you there are other things besides self-efficacy that encourage or discourage motivation. So there are things like values and physiological states, as we talked about earlier, that can impact self-efficacy. And sometimes, in the best of cases, people, human beings, outperform their normal and maybe even logical self-efficacy because they believe in something. And that can be very powerful. Now, with students with learning disabilities, in some cases, as documented in research, students with learning disabilities overestimate their capabilities to perform certain tasks. They can have the American Idol syndrome. They can think that they can sing like a rock star and they're kind of squeaking by. And the reason that this is so difficult is not because it matters if they try for things beyond their capabilities. It matters because if a student fails at something, when they believe they can do it, in their mind, they have to come up with a reason why. And that reason can be debilitating. It can be anger, or it can be self-inflicted. It can be that they believe that they are failures. Neither of those is the best outcome for the student. So what we have to learn to do to help students, and sometimes to help ourselves, is to help gauge, it's called calibration, to help get a good calibration of what your capabilities are and then grow the efficacy from that point. And here's the study that shows it. Students with, this study was on, by the way, writing. The reason you see writing there is it was an actual study of students in a big participant base. And so they were dealing with students in terms of writing tasks. And they found that miscalibration of efficacy beliefs, meaning that the participants overestimated their ability to accomplish their task, is a naive overconfidence. And this might be considered a warning sign of what? Faulty task analysis or poor self-knowledge. Faulty task analysis, poor self-knowledge. What does this mean? Now, setting aside the American Idol candidates, who are a different kind of issue, but if you have a child, particularly a child with a learning disability, and that individual overestimates to a degree that it's unrealistic his or her ability to do something, that tells us something about the opportunities available to help that child. That means faulty task analysis means it really has to do with metacognitive skills. It means that the individual didn't really understand what was needed to be successful. That would be one thing. They looked at the job and they thought it was easier or different than it was. Or they didn't understand themselves to know what their capabilities were. So with students with learning disabilities, it is possible to help them if you can help them recalibrate the task, better understand what they need to do, or help them better understand what their skills are. Now, this gets confusing because when you start talking about understanding what they are, it sometimes gets mixed up with other terms. So terms that are good to be aware of are self-efficacy, which we're talking about, self-concept, and global self-esteem. Self-efficacy, as we've been talking about, is what do you think your odds are of being able to do something at the designated level? In other words, is it a marathon or is it 7 marathons in 7 days? Self-concept is what your abilities are. Can you figure out, I'm good at this or I'm not good at this? And global self-esteem is what kind of person they think they are. Am I a good person? I try hard. I might not be good at something, but I try hard. That's global self-esteem. Now let's have a little, I'm not going to spend much time on this because I want to make sure I don't take too long. This is the way general self-concept is at the top of this, and some of the perceptions are at the bottom. Am I good in math? Am I attractive? Do my peers like me? So let's take a little quiz in your head. You don't have to give me the answers. Here's 4 ideas. I can put my ideas into writing, is the first one. Is this a measure of self-efficacy, self-concept, or self-esteem? And I'll give you the answers in a minute. I am satisfied with myself. Self-efficacy, self-concept, or self-esteem. I am good at science. Self-efficacy, self-concept, or self-esteem. And the last one uses the same 4 variables. I can choose an appropriate formula to solve a chemical problem. All right, got it? 4 labels. All right, I can put my ideas into writing. Self-efficacy, because I can do this. That's where it's coming from. I can do this. I am capable of doing this. I am satisfied with myself. That's self-esteem. I like myself. I can do this. By the way, it could be negative. And then you would, self-esteem, you would be measuring the statement saying they had low self-esteem. I'm good at science. That's self-concept. Things like, I have a good sense of humor. I'm good with numbers. I'm good at science, self-concept. And the last one, I can choose an appropriate formula. That means I know how to do this. So we're back to self-efficacy. By the way, you see there's not a global self-esteem one in here. If you want students to achieve, the research shows that there is a high correlation between self-efficacy and academic achievement. There is a little correlation between self-concept, I'm a good person, I'm good at math, between self-concept and academic achievement. And there is no correlation between global self-esteem, I'm generally a good person, I'm valuable, between global self-esteem and academic achievement. How can you help self-efficacy? Now, we've talked about these 4 already. Here are some strategies. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, just to give you a general idea of how many there are. But I will add, and this is not on there, they need to be authentic. You cannot, if you give shallow kinds of attaboys or attagirls, or you can do this, students can see through that, you can see through that. So when you use these strategies, it takes some discernment of finding those qualities that you want to help the student learn that they are valuable and the student is valuable. And they do have success stories to tell. They may be small success stories, but they're in there somewhere. So you give them choices. You allow them to take control of the pace. You explain to them why they're doing something. You let them demonstrate some of that. You explain to them why what they're learning, like what we were just talking about before this started, we were talking about job interview skills for students. And that should be an easy thing to enhance the self-efficacy, because those people can understand that having interview skills will make a difference in their life. Things teachers can do is explain what the expectations are, make the these on this list are metacognitive informational skills. Sometimes students can't judge whether or not they can do something because they don't know 2 things. They don't know what it means to do that thing. They don't know the steps. Or 2, they don't know enough about what skills they have that they can apply to accomplishing them. The last one I like, show concern for successes and failures. Compliment students on the skills they develop. Help them practice lack of effort explanations for poor performance. That's an interesting one. If the reason a student did not perform well is because they were not like the little train that could, but because they didn't try, that is something they can control. If you give them reasons that they can control, you can enhance their efficacy. So normally, it sounds like you're kind of getting out of responsibility by saying, I really didn't try, that's why I failed the test. But it also is helpful in this way. They can control their effort. If it's a factor that can be controlled, then by trying harder, like the little train, they can enhance their efficacy. Here's a little bit about students with learning disabilities. This is pure research. The first one I've underscored enough times. They cannot accomplish the tasks that they're not capable of accomplishing just because they think they can. But there is something you can do. The second one, improve their calibration skills. That means help them figure out how to do it, which means understanding what needs to, the baby steps, what do they need to do to be successful, and what you don't do, none of you would do this, but sometimes parents do. You don't say, this is beyond your capabilities, this is too hard for you. You say instead, this is the first thing you need to do if you want to be able to accomplish this. And anything that helps students foster their self-awareness and self-regulation, like emotional intelligence, will help them with calibration. This is more of the research, and I'm just going to go through it real quickly on the right. You make the learning environment inviting. You try to help their self-efficacy by giving them small steps. You help them believe that they can change the way they think. Wow, that's a big one. Help them believe it's like the first one we talked about, the dessert tray. Changing your mind can change the way you behave. And help them set reasonable goals. Now, there's a lot of studies, which is interesting, about teachers' efficacy. And one of the people, because I teach a class about her book, is Anita Woolfolk. She also goes by Anita Woolfolk Hoy. And she has found that self-efficacy, high self-efficacy in teachers helps their students achieve more. Literally, they achieve more. She did a study on 5th grade students taking standardized tests with teachers that had low and high efficacy. And there was a measurable difference that teachers with high efficacy in themselves, their students earned higher skills. So, and this is by Bandura, again, the Canadian that I began with. He says, even the most self-assured, like all of you, educators, will raise their perceived efficacy if models teach them better ways of doing things. So by attending seminars like this one, you can raise your own self-efficacy, which, guess what, makes you a better teacher or educator. Because teachers with high efficacy persist when things do not go smoothly. They're resilient. They are less critical of students who make mistakes, and they work longer with students who are struggling. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 studies, and there's Woolfolk Hoy that I talked about. There's 4 studies that demonstrate this. Now here's a take on the I think you can. Bandura says, if you think you can, you probably can. If you think you can, well, that's self-limiting, and self-fulfilling belief might well stop you from doing something you're perfectly capable of doing. Now we've covered, just to review, define self-efficacy. We've talked about how this relates to motivation, how it affects learning, what some of your best practices are, and how self-efficacy of teachers relates to learning. Now I'm going to stop, and I thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. I'll look